Back with you tonight. Let's stay with that pressure on food prices, fuel costs and electricity costs in South Africa. India banned wheat exports on Saturday, just days after announcing it was targeting record shipments this year. It blamed the ban on a scorching heat wave that has curtailed output and the fact that the domestic prices have hit a record high. Globally, buyers were banking on supplies from the world's second biggest wheat producer after exports from the Black Sea region plunged following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. India's wheat ban is already affecting wheat prices in South Africa due to the Moscow-Kyiv conflict. Joining us now on the extent of the problem and how it will impact South African consumers is Paul Makube, an agricultural economist at FNB. Paul, good evening. Thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Of course, there have been developments in the story. India, following that announcement, has kind of done an about turn on this announcement, but of course damage is already done as the bushel prices have hit record highs and drawn some criticism even from the G7. Just take us to the announcement exactly. What did they announce and what was the policy before that?
Thanks very much and good evening. The announcement was with regard to restricting, exports of wheat out of India due to the inclement weather that actually reduced, harvest, and the fact that higher prices were impacting on the, Indian society, and therefore they took a decision to restrict exports, and obviously that attracted criticism globally. Given the fact that we're dealing with a war situation in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, which together are the major exporters of wheat in the world, and therefore India will be exacerbating the situation. You'd recall that lately Indonesia also embarked on a similar, policy route where they restricted or banned the exports of palm oil, for exports, and this is a threat to globalization and sharing of resources across the world, yes. And that's therefore the need to actually discourage this kind of behavior.
So Ukraine amounting or counting for 12% of the global exports are out of the picture at this particular point because of the conflict, and India saying they will increase their 10 million or their 7 million tons to 10 million. Why was this important to the point that it drew the kind of reaction that it drew?
You'd recall that globally food prices have been increasing. And I think, domestically the prices of wheat impacted on the poor, and therefore, it has to, food prices have an historic issue of, destabilizing democracies. Previously, we have seen that, and therefore, I think that was, one of the major, push for that ban on the exports. But I think they have since did an about 10, which is very important given the fact that globally we're sitting with a crisis, and therefore everyone should actually play ball and ensure that especially the poorer regions are able to get the product, especially the fact that it's actually stable food. And Africa imports a lot of wheat from all over the world, and therefore it is important that it is made available and trade continues to flow.
Yeah. What was the reaction then market-wise globally? We've seen commodity prices having soared, and are they going to remain that way, or with the about turn, are we going to get some kind of change in those prices, at least in the near future?
Okay, remember the prices were already elevated, by the whole situation, given the fact that the two major countries are almost out of the, export market. And therefore, the action by India was actually exacerbating the situation. So we're likely to see a situation where prices, soften slightly, but at a high level. which is still a cause for concern, given the fact that it is a stable food. And if you look at us in Kenya, who are the major importers and net importers of wheat, we are vulnerable given the fact that we also have a weaker exchange rate that actually increased the prices of imported wheat into the country.
Yeah, I wanted to come to that next then. What does it really mean that South Africa is the net importer of wheat? One would think we are in Africa, surely we produce our own wheat to an extent. Why do we find ourselves in a situation where we are a net importer of wheat, and this could certainly affect us?
There's a number of factors that actually affected us to be, a net importer. One was the fact that wheat is largely a winter crop that is grown largely in the Western Cape. We don't have sufficient environments for production of wheat. It is grown in the parts of the Northern Cape and the Free State during the summer period, but still not enough. The last time we produced just over 3 million tons was about 1988 thereabout, when the hectares were very high. But what happened since then is that competition from other crops, as farmers switched to alternative crops, due to the fact that they were very, profitable, also resulted in the, loss in hectares or planted area over time, and resulted us in a situation where we are net importers of wheat. We can increase production, is slowly, coming back, but we still have to, increase our yields, improve the varieties, and so on, to ensure that we can have sufficient supply for South Africa to meet local demand. But the efforts so far indicate that we are continuing to reduce that dependency on imported wheat. But that will take time to actually see a situation where we are self-sufficient.
So to get the full extent then of the impact of the record highs, which you said were already in existence because of the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, just put us in a picture. Where do we use wheat in South Africa, and why do we need so much of it? And therefore, in terms of the value chain, which industries will be impacted?
I think the first one that comes, to mind is bread, which is the largest component, and it is used in the confectionery industry for production of biscuits and other cookies. And then you have the use in livestock feed as well. So those are the uses of, and also in manufacturing, in instances where there's need for production of, alcohol. But the bread is your biggest one, given that it's part of of South Africa staples, and therefore it is going to be hard hit. And not only the price of wheat. The price of fuel has been on the rise, and it continues to increase, and therefore it adds to the up the value chain in terms of the costs that are associated with the production of wheat, which means the consumers will remain under pressure, and therefore the price of food in general will remain relatively high.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially that would mean bread. That would mean, if you're saying it also goes into the feed, that means protein as well will be affected by this. Generally, it will put the food inflation at a very high level. Is this something that will be permanent, or something that we could see reprieve from in the near future?
Fortunately, on the livestock or on the feed side, it is not a big component of that. Your biggest component is your maize. But also on that side, we're sitting at high prices of maize, especially yellow maize in particular, which is currently trading at a premium over its white counterpart. and therefore livestock feeders, especially intensive livestock systems such as your feedlots, your poultry producers or pork producers, are actually operating at very, very huge, feed costs. Feed manufacturers as well. Maize is a raw input into those operations, and therefore they sit with the high cost of raw input into their environments. Therefore, the whole meat complex is impacted by the huge cost that is associated with the raw inputs such as maize, sunflower, and soybeans, and more.
Now, initially, the Reserve Bank had predicted that the food inflation would be something that would be temporary. Would they need to have a real look at that and maybe have a more long-term estimate of how high food inflation will remain?
I think they had a look at that, but if you look at the current volatility and the fact that the uncertainty about the war situation, because at the moment we're riding the war at the moment. If you look at the domestic fundamentals, supplies are relatively strong. We have a relatively huge harvest of grain in South Africa. About if you talk maize, we're about 14.79 million tons of maize. We consume about 11.8, just under 12 million tons, and we have a carryover stock, from the previous season, which is over 3 million tons, which is huge. But the external factors are actually the ones that are actually influencing the domestic prices, given that we are an open economy and our prices are actually import parity based. So it's external factors that are actually influencing this, and obviously the Reserve Bank, will consider these developments. The rand, exchange rate, and also, interest rates are not only a function of what happens on the food front. We see the upswing in interest rate outlook globally. With major reserve banks actually on an aggressive hiking cycle. So they find themselves in that kind of a situation that therefore all those things will actually influence them in terms of direction of policy going forward, and expectations are even that it's going to be an aggressive posture going into the next meeting this week.
When is the food inflation going to begin to bite for South Africans, or is it already doing that?
It's already doing that, and the next is going to be the worsening of the situation in the short term. But if you look at the supply, outlook, if the rand, turns the corner, we trade below, probably below, 14 to the dollar, and we see a decline in international crude oil prices, so that you have fuel prices, declining. We are likely to see a situation where some moderation. We see some moderation in prices, and also the fact that developments on in the northern hemisphere, from a planting perspective, the northern hemisphere is entering into their crop season, and we have to monitor, what happens there in terms of weather. Is it allowing them to plant more of the grains? And if that happens, the second half of the year, that's when they start harvesting, and that will provide an indication as to where the fundamentals on the international market will be, and it will give us a direction as to whether we are likely to see further moderation in the food prices, or even grain prices that should filter through to the consumer. But in the near term, we expect the worsening of the situation given the current environment.
What will it take, in today's situation to bring down the inflation? What it require? It's surely not just the monetary policy alone that will bring the inflation down.
Well, the factors that we have, that I've mentioned are mostly external factors, and there's limited ability to actually influence them in a different way. We produced enough. The farmers have done their job. the exchange rate is influenced by the, external factors, and therefore, we have, less control over that. And except for interest rate at the moment, that will actually, have an influence on consumers, and if there's contraction in consumer demand, it might, force a situation where, the prices start, coming down. But obviously, that the margins that the margins that the retailers will be making will be very, very thin, and the question is whether they'll be sustained in the long term. So obviously, the only improvement in the situation is to see even more production happening, and increase the availability for South Africa. Fortunately, at current prices, they are very attractive for farmers to respond to the situation, and so we're likely to see the second round, which is the second season, the next season coming, encouraging producers to actually increase output, given the relatively favorable production conditions that we had over the past 2 years. There's good build up of moisture, and the outlook still calls for almost normal to slightly above normal production conditions in the next season. So if that holds, we are likely to see a situation where we get even a bumper crop in the season ahead. But obviously, developments on the international market with possible ceasefire in Europe would likely to help prices come down in the medium to long term.
Paul Makube, I appreciate your time.